All right, so Ming Dynasty. Let's see. Got all these videos, but let's just start off with some general Wikipedia entry. We'll just start that as a general introduction.
Joe, thank you for all your research and doing this for us.
Yeah, you're welcome, and I enjoy it. And it actually doesn't take all that long with YouTube, and I don't know, it's not like I'm spending hours and hours, but spend a little bit of time. But it's fun. It's worth it. I'm learning. So Wikipedia, and so with the Ming Dynasty, the years they give is 1368 to 1644, so not quite 300 years. And yeah, 13 to 1640. And so the Song Dynasty that we looked at last time, again, just a reminder, was from 960 to 1279, and the Ming Dynasty 1368. So there's about almost 100-year interval there. And during that time, if you remember, it was the Mongols and Genghis Khan and his people and his family that conquered. They were they were setting out to conquer the whole world, and so there's 100 years there when the Mongols, and it's called that was called the Yuan, Y-U-A-N dynasty, and it was Mongol. And they were outsiders, and then this Hongwu emperor and rose to power, and I think they drove out the Mongols. Pretty much, yeah. So, and that was the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, right? And so many accomplishments. I mean, they took the accomplishments of the Song Dynasty, which were really cultural, artistic, scientific. And we looked at this amazing city, capital of Song Dynasty, and they just carried it further, and all the arts and sciences and architecture and boat building. We'll look at that, which is really fascinating. The ships they built, largest in the world. Only larger ones have only been built recently, so they're huge. And they started traveling the world. I think the Silk Road really got established, to trade with the West during the Ming Dynasty. So China really opened up and branched out, even though they built the Great Wall during that time, one of the accomplishments. But they also, so Ming Dynasty ceramics became very popular in Europe and England and Europe, all over. And so there's a very lucrative trade. Yeah. Okay, so like I said, all the arts, ceramics, porcelain, silk weaving, the tapestries. I have when I was in high school in 1964, we went to the New York World's Fair, and my class, and the only thing I remember is the Chinese pavilion. I have no memory of anything else. And the part of the Chinese pavilion that I remember was the tapestries, the silk tapestries. And I was so amazed because they looked like oil paintings, and you had to get up to within 2 feet of them before you realized this is not an oil painting. This is a silk tapestry. That's how delicate and finely nuanced and shaded they were. And it's like, I was, when I was 16, I was just astounded by it. And the one art object that I still can picture in my head was a freestanding cat, just white silk. And it was in plastic. So it was, and it looked like a real cat, like had been mummified or something. And again, you had to get up close to realize this was a silk weaving freestanding. So you could look at it in some kind of a hard plastic container, so you could walk around it. It's just amazing. That's the only thing I remember about the 1964 World's Fair. So, but that shows my artistic side, right? I wasn't interested in science or anything.
Right.
Right.
Of course,
Okay.
it was a long time ago.
Yeah, right, exactly. So again, weaving, silk building, they built the Chinese wall, the Great Wall, the Forbidden City, landscape painting developed, and they started using more colors. And there was a certain brown that became widely used that was not used during the Song Dynasty. Jade, theater, all the arts, music and poetry, literature, novels, et cetera, pottery, bamboo carvings, jade carvings. There's just these incredible works of art that just flourished during this time. So, and they, I think they divided, at least artistically, into three periods: the early, middle, late Ming Dynasty periods. Okay, some people think the years 1400 to 1450 were the peak, the middle, that peak period, and that was just the beginning of the Renaissance. And we got some new people. Hi, Cheryl, and whoever else is joining us. Susan May. Right. So I'm just starting.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just starting with covering the Ming Dynasty, and maybe we're going to need 2 sessions to do this. I was saying. So that was just when the Renaissance in Italy and Europe was beginning to happen, but that's considered the peak. Not that the later period was that bad or anything, but the Art of War, I think that famous instruction manual on how to be a good warrior. And then they not only were they trading on land, but I said they built these amazingly large ships, very complex, and they started exploring. This one admiral, and I forget his name, he's famous, and these fleets would go out and they explored Africa, the coast, the west or east coast of Africa, all the way, and you see in the architectural digs or even in even to India, southern India, there's these art objects from China, from the Ming period, from that time. So yeah, it was an incredible period. Looking at this word, court eunuchs, the emperor, and that he had hundreds of in his harem, hundreds and hundreds, and so the men, they had hundreds of eunuchs, and the eunuchs actually had quite a lot of power, and there's all kinds of intrigues around eunuchs, but it was considered, and men would volunteer to lose their masculinity just for the privilege of being in that forbidden city. No one was allowed to trespass. If you got caught trying to sneak in, you were killed. So it was a big, right there in the center of Beijing. That's the other thing. Beijing became.
I have a question. So you talked about these ships that they built that going along the east coast of Africa and even southern India. What about this whole, I guess it's a myth now, we could call it, of China being isolationist and not wanting to have anything to do with the rest of the world? That's not accurate then.
I think that happened more after the Ming Dynasty with the next. There was a whole different culture of the Han people or something. The Han Chinese. The Ming Dynasty was the last imperial dynasty ruled by the Han Chinese. They're the East Asian ethnic group and nation native to Greater India in the Yellow River Basin. They constitute the world's largest ethnic group. Did you know that? Making up about 80% of the total global population. I think the next dynasty was not Han, and I think they became more isolationist. But the Ming Dynasty were, they built a wall which was defensive, but they were, the Silk Route, and then these fleets of trading ships. Okay, so
I knew nothing about the trading ships. That's really fascinating.
I have a little video about them. It's really fascinating. Look at that.
Oh, good.
It's very complex. You could spend your whole career, if you're an art historian, just one little dimension of
Absolutely.
So we're, just in 2 sessions, we'll just
think right about later.
So, fascinating. And there's stories of someone who had an umbrella holder, porcelain jar, I think in London, and some family member decides to get it evaluated, and it's an original Ming worth millions, and for decades have been used as an umbrella holder in the hallway. You'll recognize that classic deep blue and white. My mother had one, and when she died, I went and had it evaluated, but it wasn't worth anything. I was fantasizing. I had an original Ming. It was an original Ming bowl that it's going to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But no, not in my destiny this lifetime. All right, so let's start looking at some of these videos. I was hoping Michael Wood, who we looked at, did the video last time of the song. He's great. And he's the one that does the story of India. Okay, and I really like him. And he did the story of China. And the only one available on YouTube was the one about the Song Dynasty. And I was hoping I could find him because he did the Ming Dynasty, but it's not on YouTube. So the documentary I do have it's okay, but it doesn't have that. It's not Michael Wood with his personality and his charmingness. All right, so let's see how to start. So man, we're just gonna, this is gonna be not follow any necessary order. You just come at it from all different angles. And then here, silk tapestry. Up here. Okay, so Ming Masterpieces. All right, let's start with this one.
Ming Masterpieces
I click on this.
Museum.
Yeah.
I could just click on it and I'll from here, but it's not working. Maybe it works for him. I gotta copy it. And go here. All right.
Well, hi, Margine. I just got your message. I was working with a client. Wow.
Okay, so mute your mic, people. Okay.
Your shoulders really hurt.
Cheryl, please mute your mic. Hey, Cheryl, can you mute your mic if you're going to be talking to somebody? Can you hear me? No, she walked off. Here, this is an exhibit somewhere in England. It doesn't say where.
When people think about the word Ming, they often think about Ming vase, Ming porcelain. And certainly when people come into this exhibition, they will see some of the most beautiful porcelain that's ever been made. But I hope also they'll be surprised to see Ming objects of a kind that they had not anticipated or not expected. Most of the things in the exhibition have never been seen in Britain before. A great number of things excavated in China very recently. The Ming period in China lasts from 1368 to 1644, but in this exhibition we're concentrating on a narrower period, the half century from 1400 to 1450.
This is at the University of Oxford.
It's a period of unprecedented engagement by the Ming Empire with the rest of the world. In some ways, the textbook understanding of the Ming has been one in which the Ming was the absolutely quintessential Oriental despotism, in which you had one imperial court that called all the shots. And one of the things that new research has done is shown us the importance of, especially at this early period, the regional princely courts which are spread across China. So one of the big themes of the exhibition is the role of these regional princely courts.
The exhibition itself divided into 5 rooms. So the first is all about the imperial courts, but also the regional courts that were set up by the Ming founder. Within that section, you have the most extraordinary quality of objects. Many of these things have never left China before, and they are truly stunning. So you have solid gold ewers, 3-meter high golden embroidered textiles, costumes of a prince who died of a drug overdose at the age of 19, and the only extant crown of a prince covered in jewels.
One of the crowns that we have is a 9-tasseled crown with beads hanging in front of the face of the wearer. And the emperor would have had 12 threads, whereas the prince has 9 threads of these gems. So that actually shows very clearly that these princes were cultural representatives of the emperor in these other parts of China. They're the only surviving examples that we have of those particular crowns from China so far.
Within the Arts of War section, we have a 7-meter long scroll which shows eunuchs in the Forbidden City gardens playing kipi-upi, playing mini-golf, shooting arrows and riding on horses to play polo. And there's also a whole range of inlaid weaponry of fabulous swords, saddles, helmets, guns and cannon. We move into the section about the arts of peace, and here some of the finest paintings from the early 15th century are displayed. But also in this section devoted to culture, we have perhaps what's been described many times as the world's first encyclopedia. In fact, it's a compilation of all knowledge, rather like a very early Wikipedia, in which all types of different kinds of knowledge are brought together, everything from feng shui diagrams to recipes for beans. In the section on beliefs, we get across the idea of multiple faiths coexisting peacefully within China.
One of the things that we're very thrilled to have in the exhibition is a Quran written in Beijing. And this Quran, which was written by a Chinese Muslim calligrapher, is dated 1401. It's the earliest dated Quran that was produced in China. And it's a very important piece of material and visual evidence for both the multicultural society of Ming China and the fact that this was a society in which a number of religious traditions lived side by side and were all, to a degree, patronized by the imperial court.
The AHRC funding was generous and allowed us to achieve time which we could spend on the project. It allowed us to organise a fantastic forthcoming conference where we will have over 30 speakers from around the world discussing topics centred on the early 15th century in court culture. I've been to China about 3 times each year during the project, and this has allowed us to develop relationships with the 10 different museums that we're working with in China, and also to increase the profile of the project, which has certainly reached the ears of the very senior politicians within the Chinese government.
One of the most spectacular objects in the exhibition is this solid gold belt. The belt was made for Prince Zhuang of Liang, a younger brother of one of the early Ming emperors. The gemstones with which it studied were not produced within the Chinese Empire itself. They almost certainly came from Sri Lanka, and therefore they demonstrate the ways in which the contact between the Ming Empire and the other parts of the world put into circulation types of object and types of material that they hadn't had access before. It's a very spectacular object, but it's also a very historically weighty object. And for me, what we've tried to do in this exhibition is bring together a body of objects that are both visually interesting and that people will be able to enjoy on that immediate level, but that if you delve into them and think about why are they here and what are they telling us, that they will also inform and stimulate on that deeper level as well.
The final exhibit is a Mantegna painting, a beautiful Renaissance painting showing the first representation of blue and white porcelain in Europe. And we want people to leave the exhibition with the idea that all of this exhibition occurs before the birth of Columbus, that China was truly internationally engaged well before the arrival of the Europeans in the 16th century. Every single detail of this exhibition has been researched. This will be visited by so many scholars from around the world. It really is a fantastic showcase of how a museum and a university can work together to deliver some original research with a great public outcome.
Yeah, so Cheryl, that I think this answered your question. They were, or at least during that period, particularly the early 1400s, first half of the 15th century, they were really engaged in trading and exploring all over the place and bringing, yeah. So, and also what I got from this is how our understanding and our scholars' understanding of the Ming Dynasty continues to evolve, and with new finds, archaeological finds, like understanding the importance of the courts, the princely courts, that wasn't just 100% coming out, the emperor, himself. But, okay, so any comments? Feel free to make as we go.
Yeah, two things really struck me. The first being that beautiful image from the Quran, as they say in Persian language, the Quran, that circular script. It was in a round, framework of the writing of the calligraphy, and then it would circle around. I don't read Arabic or Persian, but I know from study that I've done, and that's a meditation in and of itself on Allah for the Islamic people.
Right.
It was phenomenal to see that many years ago. And then the second thing was seeing the Christopher Columbus painting, the Renaissance,
Yeah.
the Italian painting in China. That blows my mind.
Well, it was the Renaissance painting. It was in Italy, and they had the trader brought this vase to Italy. And
Yeah.
the
Well, the paint, I mean, that just sort of like wipes out everything I've ever heard about China. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So, so all of that isolationism was later, wasn't happening during the Ming Dynasty. Yeah.
Oh, and that gorgeous belt, my God! And they said that the stones did not come from China. They were probably from Sri Lanka. I mean, that's fantastic to me.
Right. And also the multiculturalism and seeming tolerance of other religions, Buddhism, Islam.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were more tolerant than China is today.
A little bit. So this is incredible. Thank you.
Why don't we go before? Ming Masterpieces from the Shanghai Museum.
This is the first time that LACMA is doing a partnership with the Shanghai Museum. And it's also significant, even though it's a very modest show in size, that it's the first exhibition of Chinese painting ever organized by LACMA. I really wanted to focus on this kind of Ming Dynasty painting dating from the 15th and 16th century, so it's roughly equivalent to the Renaissance. Some of these painters lived at the same time as Leonardo and Michelangelo. There are 10 paintings in the exhibition. 5 of them are by court painters who worked for the emperors of the Ming Dynasty in the Forbidden City. Palaces had big ceilings, so these are very tall paintings, many of them, designed to be shown in very public spaces within the palace and to be seen by people who worked in the government at very high levels. So they often contain messages, symbolism revolving around the consequences of good government, of the emperor's own mandate and image in terms of creating a harmonious rule throughout Chinese society. Many of the paintings in the show are Taoist, so they explore the Taoist philosophy and religion, which believes that everything is made of energy and that the movement of energy in the world is governed by 2 forces called yin and yang that everyone's heard of.
I love how semi-abstract they are.
This religion played a big role at the court and is still very big in China. It's the one primary religion that was born in China. There's some fantastic images of both male and female Taoist immortals. Remarkable beings who can transform their shape. They can be in 20 places at the same time. They can move between this world and the next world easily. They're not bound by the parameters that we're bound by in this physical world. And they have a high degree of moral integrity. So they really are saints in that way and venerated still widely today in China. There is one great figure who's a very popular Taoist immortal named Li Tieguai, who appears twice in the show. His first name means the iron crutch, and his story goes like this. He was a great Taoist master. He was very spiritually evolved. He had disciples, and he had learned the technique of leaving his body, of going into a kind of astral projection. One day, he decided just to leave this world. He was going to transcend the boundaries of yin and yang and life and death and time and space and just get beyond all of that. And he was fully capable of doing that. And so he says to his head disciple, I'm going to go away for a week. And so my body will look like it's dead. My body will be inert, and I will be back in a week. But if by some chance I don't come back, you can just burn my body, just cremate the body, because I'm not coming back. I will have succeeded in transcending the boundaries of this world. 6 days went by, and the disciple gets this urgent call from home. His mother is dying. He's got to go home and take care of her and watch over her last moments. So he looks at Lee's body and says, he's been gone 6 days. He's probably not coming back. So he burns the body and takes off. The next day, Lee's spirit comes back. His body's gone. It's been cremated. He's very upset. And he needs a body. So he finds the first corpse he can find. He finds the corpse of a hideous, crippled beggar by the side of the road who's just died. And his spirit enters the body and reanimates it, and he comes alive. But he's got a crutch made of iron. And so from that time on, he's called Iron Crutch Lee, or Lee Tiaguai, Lee of the Iron Crutch. And he's still widely worshipped today. He was venerated by emperors and peasants alike.
Love the action, the energy, flow of energy in those paintings. It's like a wind flowing through right from directionally, and it's moving the leaves, people's hair, and you just see it in the clouds moving. So,
What do the initials LACMA stand for again?
I don't know, I forget.
Okay.
The Shanghai LAC, I'm not sure. Google images. All right, Ming Porcelain, Ming Ceramics. Just take a look at some of those on Google Images. I got that there. Right. So this, we've all seen these, right? Or examples. It's hard not to know anything about them, but they are exquisite. And I wonder where they got that blue. What was that? And these became so popular in Europe. And collectors, and there still are. I mean, now it's like the whole trade in these, if you can find them. In good shape, they're worth a fortune. Often see dragon theme as one. That's a popular theme, and you see that in the Forbidden City. That dragon is a symbol of power and authority, and I guess some magic, and also landscapes and flowers or wave patterns. A lot of action. There's a lot of movement in these. It's like the dragon is flying. He's swirling around. It's like, and you see that in the painting. They're action paintings, really, and it gets carried over into these vases. And also just animals, birds, court scenes. So this one, there's a whole, just look at a little bit about the tapestry. Kessie is I think a generic name for it. So of a certain type of tapestry. Okay. It's a technique in Chinese silk tapestry invented by the Soljins over there. It is admired for the lightness and clarity of pattern. First, this was chiefly used to protect scrolls containing paintings. Okay. So it's a tapestry weave using silk on a small scale compared to European wall hangings. Means cut silk. Here's probably an example. And I think this is an example of the things I saw, some of the things I saw at the World's Fair. So, Hesse silk.
Joe,
Yes.
my memory of China and the silk goes to the young women who were peeling off the silk from the cocoons under very hot water. Their hands were already horrible, but
Really?
that's what they did all day. And I mean, that was, not that long ago. So
Yeah.
they were still doing it the same way by hand, taking it out. And I don't know how long they could have done it.
So it's the hot water that this,
Very hot water to make it loose enough to take it off and put it on like spindles.
but it damages their hands in the long term.
Oh my gosh, yes, their poor hands.
Right. Here's an example of a silk tapestry, immortal holding a peach. His name is Dong Fang Shou and symbolizes wisdom and longevity. Okay, so and the peach is symbolic. Let me see. You see the peach appears in Chinese art of this period. Art in China has symbolic meaning. Here you go. The peach tree. Let's see. The peach is a member of the rose family. Sorry. The peach is a member of the rose family and was cultivated in China and revered as a symbol of longevity. That's what it is. It has special significance in Chinese culture. The peach tree is considered to be the tree of life, and peaches are symbols of immortality and unity. Peach blossoms are carried by Chinese brides. I didn't know that. I thought it was a cherry blossom, but that's Japanese. So for the Chinese, it's the peach. Probably has the same significance as the cherry in Japan. Oh, I looked at that one. Okay. That's sorry. Let's see, winter flowers. It's another silk tapestry. Beautiful gold. Well, I guess it's faded some with time, but the painting tapestry. It's white. It's a tapestry. He was a painter also. The guy who did this. Yeah. So.
Can you show the next one, which is a golden spider?
Yeah, I'll show you that one too. But these are. There's a close up of the detail. And again, I think like the weave is so fine and it's silk and it's just so subtle and subtle use of subtle blending of colors. It's really spectacular when you see them in person. Golden spider. This is a silk shawl. Oh, good. It's a video. How it was made, the golden spider silk.
It's frozen, Joe.
It's not frozen. It's moving.
Yeah, it's not moving.
Mine is.
Mine isn't.
Is that everybody else moving?
Mine is frozen.
Really?
Mine is frozen.
That's
Ours
weird.
is frozen.
All right, so mine isn't. Should be the other way around. That's weird. It's not moving?
Nope.
No,
Wonder why. I don't know what to do. Oh, wait, I know why. My screen sharing is paused. Why is that? The screen share paused somehow.
I don't know. You tell us.
Use that share screen. Somehow it got paused, and I don't know why. Okay, now we're
Well,
back.
that's a different shot, but it's still frozen.
Yeah, because it's.
There it
Now?
goes. There it goes.
Okay, good. Yeah, it froze up. The screen share was doing it. I don't know if this is China actually, but it's probably similar, or maybe they got this, wherever this is they learned it from China. It must be a similar process.
Well, they said the spiders were captured they were from Madagascar.
So it's not really saying where this is.
I'm not quite sure, but
It's fascinating. It's nice that it's fascinating. It must be similar process.
Wonder how they hitched up the spiders.
Mhm. But this is after they got the threads and then they're putting them together.
wherever that's from, it's amazing. Gosh.
Okay, so this is Madagascar still coming out, guys. But that's what it's on. I just want to keep watching it.
Now they're weaving with it.
I mean, it's silk weaving process. We'll see.
Good night.
I can't imagine how it would not rot. I mean, it's like spider webs.
Well, that's because I fit them into a thick enough strand.
Even so. I mean, you just break a spider. It's amazing. I would love to see it.
Well, spider webs are strong.
Gosh, it doesn't seem so. Seems like it would break.
Yeah. Okay, they put 24 of them together. Still, it's amazing. I think you need to do a whole class on this, Joe. Spider web weaving. Wow. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God. Look at that. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
One of those spools. I better get it out and look. It might be old.
Wow.
I want one.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. unbelievable. But I don't see the spiders.
Oh, in the beginning, they have the spiders, they hook them up to some kind of contraption, right, to extract the silk.
Yeah. Pull it out.
Yeah.
Like horses.
Look at that.
Wonder if they dyed that and with what? Oh my gosh. Oh.
They must have used spiders also in China. And they may have taught them in Madagascar when they went on their trips. I don't know. I'd be surprised. Similar. Look at that. I was like on one of those. Would be afraid to wear it.
Unbelievable.
Yes, I mean,
Wonder how many spiders it took to do it.
God.
You think more highly of spiders. That's what I used to.
Yeah. All right.
Wonder what that-
Isn't that like the Bissell stuff that the Italian lady does?
Right,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
from the pen shell.
Yeah, from the pen shell.
But that's a lot thicker than spider threads.
Right. Oh my gosh. I would just love to touch it. Oh,
I'd like to see the spiders hitched up
yeah.
all in a row.
And do they kill the spiders or do they keep on, let them go and then more comes out? This
I'm
is
sorry.
fascinating.
They must let them go. I mean, they must, if they can continue to
I don't know.
produce silk, they'll keep them, I'm sure. This is a Cassidy tapestry with phoenix and other birds. Look at that. And it's silk, gilt paper, and feathers. 16th century Ming Dynasty. See if I can enlarge it. Yeah. Koi fish and lotus, Chinese silk variety. Section of stitchery for the fish's fin. And just to get a sense of how they work with the silk.
But they go fast.
Yeah. That's all you're doing for your life. Get good at it. And that's just what I saw. It was a cat. This cat just was silk. Three-dimensional. That's all the rest, just to get a sense of. They're using needles and silk thread. Okay. Okay. Let's look at some ceramics. with our smart history friends. Wow.
We're in the Freer Gallery of Art, looking at this magnificent.
Anybody ever been to the Freer in DC? It's right on the main, not far from the
Yes, I have.
yeah, it's where all the museums are, but it specializes in Asian art. This one, yeah.
Bowl made during the Ming Dynasty.
This dish is extremely rare because the color red that you see here was so difficult to make that there are only a small number of ceramics with this color glaze.
So we're not talking about any red. We're talking about a very particular, dense, almost raspberry red.
It has this texture to it. You're convinced looking at it that if you touch it, you'll be touching velvet. But no, it's smooth.
It feels as if it's almost absorbing the light in the way that velvet does.
There's been a lot of scientific research trying to understand how in the 15th century did they create this glaze. The bubbles are very important here. Some of the bubbles burst, and when you get very close to the surface, there's a little bit of a sense of an orange peel effect. That's very typical in ceramic work of this time period from what's called the porcelain city of the world, Jingdezhen in South China, where this was made. So these bubbles that burst, they create some part of the surface, but the unbroken bubbles underneath are interacting with copper that's creating red. Now, copper is one of the hardest things to control in the kiln. You are actually firing in what we call a reduction atmosphere. You are having as little oxygen as possible in the kiln during the firing.
And we see some traces of that process in the kiln. If you look at the edge of the dish, you can see where the white of the porcelain is exposed, where the red has perhaps migrated ever so slightly down.
On the rim, the small amount of copper completely vaporizes, disappears, and it leaves what then becomes a clear glaze over the white porcelain body. So this is also a chance to admire not only glaze technology, but porcelain technology. Clay usually has iron impurities, things that color it, but this is snow white.
So just to put this in context, porcelain was something that was enormously prized both in China, but also in much of the rest of the world. It was prized in the Middle East and it was prized in Europe. The Medici in Florence began to try to replicate Chinese porcelain because it was so precious and it was so beautiful. But it's not just the porcelain that makes this rare. There's this double layer because while the Europeans couldn't even produce the porcelain, here we have people producing a glaze that is even more difficult.
Absolutely. This kind of dish, this quality, this color, it's very demanding to produce. And so it was produced at kilns run by officials from the court. It was a very rigorously regulated process. We think for producing an object like this, an absolute minimum would it be that it passed through 70 pairs of hands.
And that level of
Pretty much,
sophistication,
pretty close.
lavishing of resources was important because these were dishes that were meant for
Strawberry.
use.
This particular color is strongly associated in the 15th century with use for rituals dedicated to the sun. There were altars that the court worshipped dedicated to heaven, earth, sun, and moon. So we have a deep blue for heaven, a yellow for earth, a bluish white for the moon, and this gorgeous red for the sun. And in the early Ming Dynasty, ritual dishes of all kinds would have been bronze. There was a thought that you could be ritually effective, but also cost efficient if you switched to using porcelain for your ritual vessels. So this kind of dish might have held fruit or some kind of food offering. And on the bottom of the dish, we see in cobalt, which fires to a beautiful blue, a very beautiful rain mark, the name of the emperor. Everything about this dish associates it with the emperor.
So often when I'm looking at a work of art, I'm looking for a narrative that's depicted.
This is abstract. And for us as modern viewers, I think it elicits emotion. The depth of color makes me think of Mark Rothko. He was after big emotions, ecstasy, tragedy. At the time this was made, no one had that kind of language. People are making it to please the emperor and to have it used effectively in rituals that will bring the right kind of harmony to their world. But when they look at it, those emotions, I think, are still there. Color does make our brains and hearts come into action.
It's important to remember that this would not have been an object that the public would have had access to.
One of the things that I love about museums is that we are part of a modern concept of bringing what would have been hidden away objects, rare, completely secreted objects that were only brought out for a ritual purpose. Even in Ming times, this wouldn't have been shown as a connoisseur's delight. But when it was no longer ritually used, it was still stored in the palace. Then early in the 20th century, it came out of the palace when there was a great movement of objects. So then it first went into private collectors' hands. And we, as a national museum, have had the opportunity to purchase this and bring it into our care with the express purpose of sharing with the public.
Hey, that is a beautiful red. It's astounding. Really is. All right, here's the Ming umbrella stand. Christy. Only could happen to one of us.
Reminds me of American Indian.
The owner always thought that this was an 18th century jar, just a decorative object. It was in the hall being used as an umbrella stand.
Don and Erm, could you mute your thanks.
I got in touch with the owner and she agreed to send the jar to London to be inspected in person. Once it arrived, we were absolutely speechless. And the more we studied it, the better it got. Day by day, we were getting more and more excited. And then we realized that we were actually handling an incredibly important piece of Chinese porcelain from the Ming Dynasty, more specifically from the reign of the Xuande Emperor, who reigned from 1426 to 1435.
It flows very extremely well. The body actually wraps all the way around, looking at its tail. The 5-clawed dragon is a symbol of the emperor, whilst 3-clawed dragons are a symbol of the prince.
Did you get that? The 5-clawed dragon is a symbol of the emperor, 3-clawed dragon symbol of a prince.
So as a 5-clawed dragon, this jar would have been made for the Xuande emperor. What is also typical about the Xuande period is the cross mark across some of the vessels, because it's very difficult to fire something so massive without having it collapse or explode in the kiln. This jar, when it was fired, it would have been held on a setter that has a cross. It is quite unusual because a lot of people who are copying it do not see bases or do not see the other side of what is not illustrated in a catalogue. And what is also extraordinary about this jar is the four Porcelain, the 4 mythical beast heads right at the top here on its shoulder.
The 4-character mark reads Xuande Nianzhi, which basically means made under the reign of the Xuande Emperor. Porcelain created during that period is regarded amongst connoisseurs amongst one of the finest ever made in China. It is an incredibly expensive umbrella stand, but this is the beauty of Chinese art. Unless you have a little understanding of it, you can walk past it and not realize that it's something incredibly important.
Yeah. Wonder what that person got for it. How much they paid for it. What are we doing here? Let's watch a general documentary now about the Ming Dynasty. Okay, that's more of an umbrella. So we got some tastes of here and there about the porcelain, the tapestries, the weaving, etc. All right, so this is 35 minutes long. And then if there's any time left over, we'll look at some more of the shorter ones. We'll pick it up next time, okay? And this is the one that talks about the shipbuilding. So,
today, nearly 500 years after the end of the Ming Dynasty, its wonders continue to fascinate. There is the colossal Yongle bell, which tolled in the year 2000 to celebrate the beginning of the new millennium. There are the golden glazed tiles in the Forbidden City that shine against Beijing's azure sky. And then there are the legendary voyages made by Zhang He to the Western Seas. During the Ming Dynasty, there were new achievements in architecture, shipbuilding, porcelain making, and textiles. Products made in China were already well known throughout the world for their high quality and supreme craftsmanship. But during the Ming Dynasty, Chinese technology was to reach an unprecedented level, in the process adding yet more vibrant colors to the civilization of China and the world. The Ming Dynasty was founded in the year 1368, and after a few years of recovering following the overthrow of the previous dynasty, the nation began to thrive once again. In the year 1405, the Ming Emperor proclaimed that a magnificent royal palace would be built in Beijing. Today, that palace is commonly referred to as the Forbidden City. While construction of the new royal palace was underway, more than 300 ships from China, the largest fleet of vessels sent out on a mission of exploration in the history of the planet, was in full sail on the Indian Ocean. This was the first voyage of Zhang He, an envoy of the Ming Emperor, who had been sent out into the Western Seas. As Zhang He's vessels plied the waves, back in Beijing, 230,000 craftsmen from every conceivable trade were joined by 1 million laborers to start work at the construction site of the Forbidden City. Officials and their legmen had ventured into remote forests in Sichuan, Hunan and Hubei provinces in search of the very best timber and construction stone. The Emperor of Ming had a dream that his nation would become a formidable power accorded due respect from lands across the ocean. To help him bring this about, the Emperor selected Zhang He to be the commander of a massive fleet, and he was perfect for the job. 35 years old, tall, handsome, courageous and very intelligent, Zhang He had many military feats and accomplishments behind him, and what was more, he was familiar with diplomatic protocol. To accomplish the mission entrusted to him, and before facing a voyage in uncharted waters that was certain to be perilous, Zhang He had first to obtain ships capable of withstanding the demands of such a long journey into the unknown. Between 1403 and 1405, almost every site in the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River in China's southeast was converted into shipyards, and orders were placed for more than 2,000 ships. The Longjiang shipyard in Nanjing became the largest ship construction facility in the world. Timber of all sizes literally flooded into the shipyard via the Yangtze River, and there thousands of workers were ready and waiting to begin work. Shipbuilding and navigation are like twins, as both require the most advanced technologies in hydromechanics, material mechanics, astronomy, meteorology, and manufacturing. The ability of a nation to build great ships has always mirrored the general level of science and technology in that nation's society. The level of shipbuilding technology achieved during the Ming Dynasty was seen first in the size of the ships produced. The largest type of ship in Zheng He's fleet, known as a treasure boat, was truly massive. At 126.72 meters long and 51.84 meters wide, it was larger than an Olympic-sized soccer field. It had a displacement of 10,000 tons and was able to carry 1,000 people. Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria, built 87 years later, was just 35 meters long, 1/5 the size of one of Zheng He's treasure boats. In the shipyards, the shipbuilders worked day and night. The Longjiang shipyard had many workshops under it, each specializing in a different task, such as carpentry, mechanics, and sail making. Other items needed, such as ropes and nails, were supplied from elsewhere. From objects unearthed at the shipyard, archaeologists have determined that every piece of timber that arrived in the shipyard was numbered, and this means the shipyard implemented a standardized workflow system, rather like a modern-day assembly line. A treasure boat was truly massive. It had no less than 7 floors, 3 above the main deck and 4 below. Of the lowest 2 decks, one contained rocks to stabilize the ship, while the other was for storing food and fresh water. The other 2 floors below deck accommodated sailors and soldiers. The second floor above deck, the most comfortable, had the best view, the freshest air, and suffered from the least movement. This deck was, of course, reserved for officials. The top floor was a working area for lookouts, although part of it was set aside for a luxurious guest room. Following the experience of centuries of seafarers before him, Zheng He's treasure boat was made in the shape of a V. Its sternum consisted of long timbers fastened tightly by iron bars. This was done to ensure the maximum stability. But as well as this, the ship had a ballast design. The ratio between the length and width of the ship was 2 to 45, a ratio that prevented the hull from snapping in violent seas. Modern experimentation has proved that the maximum strength for the hull of a ship is achieved when it is between 340 to 380 millimeters thick. The hulls of Zheng He's treasure boats fell precisely within these limits. Building such massive treasure boats during the Ming Dynasty, when screws and welding were unknown, was truly an extraordinary achievement. China had been the world's leader in shipbuilding and navigation since the Qin and Han dynasties around 2,000 years ago. During the Song dynasty around 1,000 years ago, China was building very large ships according to highly rational designs. They even had watertight compartments to lessen the chances of sinking. But the huge ships built for Zheng He during the Ming Dynasty pushed Chinese shipbuilding technology and navigation to new and unprecedented levels. But after completion, how was such a massive ship moved out of the yard and into the sea? Inside Zhongbao village, to the west of present-day Nanjing city, 3 long and narrow pools can be seen. Each pool is 40 meters wide, and they lie parallel to one another very close to the Yangtze River. These are the docks used 600 years ago for building large ships, and it was right here that workers laid the so-called bird sternum, the wooden framework, of Zheng He's ships. After each ship was completed, the gate to these docks was opened to let in the water, and the newly completed ship began to float. Following the narrow waterway, the new ship sailed to the sea via the Yangtze River. The first of Zheng He's voyages to the western seas began on a day in July 1405. Zheng He's fleet was to set off from the port of Liaojia in Taicang, and on the day, the port was a scene of great excitement. Against the sky could be seen the sails of no less than 300 massive ships. When Zheng He's fleet of 317 ships carrying 27,000 men sailed out into the sea, it was the beginning of the greatest voyage ever undertaken in Chinese history, and it would be commonly referred to by later generations as Zheng He's voyages into the western seas. Zheng He was to make many more voyages. While he was on his 5th seagoing journey, far away in Beijing, the new royal palace, being built along the south-north central line of the city in a highly symmetrical manner, was just beginning to reveal itself. The central line, which ran across the entire city, highlighted the city's landmarks in a way that was stately, orderly, grand, and harmonious to the eye. The dark red palace walls and the golden yellow tiles of its roofs set the Forbidden City apart from all the other buildings around it. Building the Forbidden City involved countless bricks, tiles and other construction materials, and all were made according to highly complicated processes, and this is to say nothing of the numerous decorative carvings. Behind the hall named Baohe, which means preserving harmony, lies the largest flight of stone steps carved out of a single piece of stone.
That's one piece of stone.
4 very impressive-looking octagonal towers were built to guard the corners of the Forbidden City. Each tower has 9 beams, 18 pillars, 72 ridges, and 1,500 other parts. No seams are visible. All the parts were joined using mortise and tenon construction techniques. In every sense, these towers are a marvel. A Chinese saying goes, any great feat of history, whether civilian or military, is commemorated by the construction of a huge bell. And so it was in the year 1418, when the ruler of the Ming Dynasty, who had decided to move his capital from Nanjing to Beijing, issued instructions for the making of a huge bell to commemorate his exploits. In March of 1418, master bell makers were called to Beijing, and there they learned of the specifications the government had set for the new bell. They were unbelievable. The bell was to be 6.94 meters tall, 3.3 meters wide at the mouth, and weigh 46.5 tons. Producing such a massive bell even today would be an extraordinary undertaking. Yet the master craftsman decided to make the bell using traditional clay mold techniques. In this traditional technique, a large pit is made in the ground to which is added a mound of clay in the desired shape. A layer of very fine clay is added to this mound so it can receive fine paper on which Buddhist sutras have been written. The paper is applied upside down to imprint the characters on the paper onto the layer of clay. When the characters and intaglio on the clay are done, the clay is fired to create the inner layer of a mold. This will later be joined by yet more layers. In theory, the creation of a huge bell necessitated a huge furnace, but at the time, there was no furnace large enough to hold more than 50 tons of molten bronze. The only solution was to have dozens of smaller furnaces working in unison. The molten bronze from these furnaces had to be released into the mold in turn, and the process had to be completed in one go. There was no room for error, either in timing or in furnace temperature. One of the purposes of moving the capital from Nanjing to Beijing was to consolidate defenses in the north. China's north was located in the middle of two very different civilizations, one of which was agricultural, the other nomadic. All 5,000 kilometers of the Great Wall were constructed with this problem in mind. The Great Wall was high, incredibly long and very solid, being built of massive slabs of stone. All the way from its eastern end to its western end, the wall had passes, lookout stands and beacon towers, thousands of them. Everything about it, its appearance, layout and aesthetic design, testified to a maximum inputs of human effort and resources. Construction on the Great Wall had begun 2,000 years before during the spring and autumn and warring states periods, and work had continued on the wall right up until the time of the Ming Dynasty. It was a project unmatched by any other engineering project in terms of size, length, difficulty, and duration of time required to complete it. The engineering technology used in the construction of the Great Wall peaked during the Ming Dynasty, both in terms of the size of structure it could produce and the defense purposes for which it could be used. During the 28 years between 1405 and 1433, the fleet commanded by Zhang He made 7 voyages to Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the eastern coast of the African continent. Chinese people of that time held the strong belief that the sky was round and the earth was square. This being the case, the possibility of suddenly falling into some abyss at the end of the world was naturally a concern. However, as worried as people were, Zhang He was still determined to reach the edge of the planet. Incredibly, the fleet was largely able to avoid the numerous submerged reefs and uncharted oceans, and managed to stay on course through the use of traditional compasses and astronomical knowledge accumulated in China over the ages. On board Zhang He's ships were navigators who were also charged with the responsibility of making, revising and recording the route the fleet had taken. This was in part to help facilitate a safe return. On the charts made by these navigators we can see recorded in great detail the routes taken by the fleet. Included are directions, water depth readings, reference objects, shallows and submerged reefs. Thanks to the compasses and the guidance of the navigation chart, Zhang He's fleet arrived at its destinations, and the fleet never got lost at sea. The purpose of Zhang He's voyages was...
It's amazing they never got lost at sea, because ships were getting lost at sea right up until the 18th century, 19th century in the West.
To show to the rest of the world the wealth and prosperity of the Ming Dynasty and its policy of maintaining...
It wasn't until they figured out how to determine latitude. And before that, they were running into reefs and sinking Western ships.
Maintaining good relations with its neighbors. As Zhang He's tactics involved presenting lavish gifts to prepare for his voyages, half of the country had been busy collecting together examples of the best things the nation produced. Porcelain and silk made up the greater proportion of these gifts. Zhang He had brought more than 10,000 copies of books to give away in the hope of spreading Chinese civilization and traditional Confucian ideas. However, the items most welcomed everywhere were the beautiful silk and brocade pieces. 37 of the countries he visited received various types of Chinese silk and brocade. Most of the silk he took with him came from the south of China. the making of textiles had reached a peak, as could be seen in the fact that during the Ming Dynasty, textile making was the #1 handicraft industry in almost every large or small town in the south. Of all the textile industries, however, silk weaving was #1. Silk weaving was the most fascinating part of traditional Oriental textile making. Oriental women brought together their remarkable skills and the beautiful images they had designed to make unique brocade. It is not only a part of Chinese history, but something that will last on into eternity. From a silkworm to silk and then to brocade, Chinese textile making had been through a magical process of innovation, and the silk and brocade produced opened up a road that linked Europe and Asia. In the early years of Christianity, nobles in ancient Rome found themselves charmed by the silk and brocade from China, describing it as rosy clouds in the sky. Through Chinese silk and brocade, they did their best to imagine the mysterious kingdom in the East from which it had come. Silk weaving had matured in China 2,000 years before during the Warring States period. Numerous silk products in a great variety of colours and embroidered in different ways have been unearthed from the tombs of that period. On October 5, 1957, archaeologists working on the inner and outer coffins of the Ming Emperor Wanli had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the very finest brocade made during the 16th and 17th centuries. Both the outer and inner coffins presented a showcase of the best silk and brocade products of the era, and the 300 years that had passed had taken no toll on their brilliance. All of the pieces were precious, but without doubt the most invaluable was the gown of Emperor Wanli, which was unbelievably light in weight, extremely thin, and highly transparent. Woven into the gown were the patterns of 17 dragons flying in clouds. The silk was of the highest quality imaginable, its threads very thin, yet highly durable. In 1983, the Nanjing Brocade Institute was entrusted by the Dingling Mausoleum Museum to produce a replica of the gown. Even with the experience it had accumulated over the previous 30 years, it took the Nanjing Brocade Institute 5 years to accomplish the task. Chinese silk and brocade products had enjoyed tremendous popularity worldwide since the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago, right through to the Tang and Song dynasties. But the Ming Dynasty pushed the silk-making technology of Song to another peak. In the early 18th century, British Navy medical workers found out what had caused the deaths of so many men under Magellan and Columbus on their famous voyages. It was scurvy, a malady caused by a lack of vitamin C. However, 80 years before Magellan and Columbus, Zheng He sailors had not suffered from a single case of this disease, for with them on their ships were porcelain containers in which they grew bean sprouts for consumption while on board. Bean sprouts are a rich source of vitamin C. After Zheng He's voyages, the countries he visited began to make Chinese porcelain. The Ming Dynasty truly was the golden age of porcelain making. Among all the kilns that made porcelain in China during the Ming Dynasty, Jingdejian in Jiangxi, Longchuan in Zhejiang, Dehua in Fujian, Yuxi and Jianshui in Yunnan stood out, and each of them had their own specialties. Jingdejian produced a complete range of products. Longchuan specialized in shadowy blue porcelain. In Dehua, it was white porcelain, and in Yuxi and Jianshui it was blue and white porcelain. Among the porcelain products Zheng He took with him, most came from Jingdejian, and they were the best. In Jingdejian, by the early Ming Dynasty, there were as many as 20 kilns producing porcelain for the exclusive use of the royal family. But apart from royal orders, a large amount of porcelain for the use of commoners was also produced in Jingdejian. Workers in the town toiled day and night, and the kiln fires blazed all year round. Some people called Jingdejian a town of thunder and flashes of lightning. Every process in porcelain making was clearly defined, from the preparation of the clay to the final firing, and altogether there were a dozen or more steps. Each step was handled by only one person, the one most skilled in that process. This division of labor was something like a modern-day assembly line. However, division of labor based on specialization and the use of an assembly line system did not hinder the artistic aspirations of the workers. Their works often revealed artistic leanings that were quite individual, proving that there was still some room for personal expression.
You only get one shot at it. You don't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake.
From finds brought up from the bottom of the South China Sea, archaeologists have concluded that during the Ming Dynasty, the amount of porcelain exported to foreign countries reached a record high. A large number of merchants from Arabia, India, Portugal, the Netherlands, and Britain could be seen doing porcelain business in China. The amount of porcelain exported to the Netherlands alone came to more than 16 million pieces. Chinese porcelain products, pale blue ones in particular, sold very well in Europe, America, and Latin America. And this is the reason why in the English language, China the country and China, the other name for porcelain, have the same spelling and pronunciation. Put simply, China from China overwhelmed the world. While Zheng He's fleet was proudly presenting its dreamlike civilization to the countries and areas it visited, the builders of the Forbidden City in Beijing were working on the world's largest royal palace. Classical Chinese construction involved 8 separate tasks, and these had changed little in thousands of years. The 8 specialized areas were carpentry, brick and tile laying, stone masonry, joinery, earthworks, painting, color painting for decoration, and last but not least, paperwork on walls and ceilings. These jobs might not sound impressive in themselves, but working together, the craftsmen in these trades produced the man-made miracle that we know today as the Forbidden City. The dark bricks that comprise the floor of the Hall of Supreme Harmony have long been looked upon in awe and referred to as gold bricks. Even today, making replicas of these bricks is an impossible task. Of all the buildings inside the Forbidden City, the Hall of Supreme Harmony is the largest, and in the years it was built, it was both the tallest building in the city of Beijing and the largest wooden construction in the world. The Hall of Supreme Harmony occupies an area of 2,381 square meters, half the size of a modern-day soccer field. The Hall of Supreme Harmony stands on an 8-meter-tall white marble base at the very center of the Forbidden City, and it is the climax of the palace complex. It not only mirrors the highest attainment of traditional Chinese architecture, but also embodies age-old Chinese philosophies. If one looked southward from the just completed Forbidden City, one would have seen another royal building complex under construction that was about the same size, the Temple of Heaven. Inside the grounds of the Temple of Heaven stands Qinyan Hall, which means the Hall of Prayers for a Good Harvest. This magnificent structure includes 28 huge pillars of a kind of mahogany known as Nanmu wood, along with wooden tiers, brackets and other parts joined together to form a wonderful whole. The arrangement of the pillars implies a profound meaning. The inner 4 suggests the 4 seasons of the year, the 12 in the middle stand for the 12 months of the year, and the outer 12, the 12 periods of a day. Together, they represent the 28 constellations of the universe. Magnificent in appearance and exquisite in detail, the inside of the hall shrinks to the center as the height increases, giving the building a stately demeanor as befits its purpose to elicit in the beholder an awesome respect for the power of heaven. This effect is enhanced by the solemn-looking eaves on top of the building and the round white marble stand at the bottom. The reputation of the Chinese products Zhang He took with him brought him considerable honor and made him welcome everywhere he visited. On his 6th voyage, he reached the African coast. There, 1,200 envoys from 16 African and Asian countries boarded his ships and returned with him to China. Back in Beijing, the Ming Emperor had to arrange for 40,000 rolls of silk and brocade to be collected from around the country to present as gifts to these foreign envoys. Among those who wanted to see the legendary civilization of China was the 28-year-old king of Borneo. Unfortunately, however, after arriving in China, he fell seriously ill, and a couple of months later, he died. The Ming Emperor honored him with the title Prince Gung Shuan, and in accordance with his wishes, he was buried in a suburb of Nanjing City. His tomb can still be seen there today. Zhang He's 5th voyage was a somewhat hurried affair, probably due to a grand ceremony held to commemorate the moving of the capital to Beijing, although this is just a guess made by scholars of later generations. By the year 1420, the Forbidden City was almost complete, and the emperor issued orders that the colossal Yongle bell be completed at the same time. With this, dozens of furnaces were fired to release the molten bronze into the mold to cast the giant bell. In 1420, the year the Forbidden City was completed, the huge bell was successfully cast, and it was named after the reign of the emperor, Yongle. The sound that emanates from this bell is fine indeed. One knock creates an echo that lasts as long as 2 minutes, and the sound is very musical. Today, we know the precise percentages of the metals in the alloy. It is 80.5% bronze and 16% tin, while the remaining 3.5% contains lead, zinc, and magnesium. These ingredients, besides making the bell very strong and helping it produce a pleasant sound, enable it to withstand rust. It is hard to imagine just how many tests would have been needed to come up with the correct percentages for this alloy 500 years ago. After all these years, the bell still produces a pleasant sound. Making it required a thorough mastery of metallurgy, casting, mechanics, and acoustics, so it is little wonder that in Encyclopedia Britannica, the Yongle bell comes first in the list of the world's most famous bells. When the Forbidden City was finally completed in the year 1420, it was a man-made marvel, a testament to the numerous ingenious engineers who built it in what was still in Europe, the Middle Ages. The Great Wall, which the Ming Dynasty had continued to build, began near the sea at Shanhai Pass in China's east and ended at Jiayu Pass in China's west. It stretched all the way from China's eastern coast to China's northwest, an area dominated by sand and wind. Most of the Great Wall was built on the tops of hills and mountains to follow the terrain, thus highlighting the shape of zigzagging mountain ranges like a huge dragon. For this reason, the Great Wall is viewed as the symbol of the Chinese nation, and together with the Egyptian pyramids and the Taj Mahal in India, it is regarded as one of the world's truly great historic engineering marvels. The Yongle Encyclopedia, compiled during the Ming Dynasty, was the largest of all the great written works compiled in ancient China. In the year 1637, Song Yingxian of the Ming Dynasty published Tian Gong Kai Wu, or Exploitation of the Works of Nature, a comprehensive book covering science and handicraft technology. Another man named Xu Guangqi wrote Nongjiang Chuanchu, or the Encyclopedia of Agriculture. After 30 years of extensive traveling, Xu Xiaoke published Travel Notes by Xu Xiaoke, which describes China's geology in great detail. Li Shejian, who lived in the middle of the Ming Dynasty era, wrote the voluminous Compendium of Materia Medica, held to be the most comprehensive medical book in Chinese history. The Ming Dynasty boasted a long list of established thinkers and literary men. The philosophical studies of Wang Yang Ming, for example, reflected a profound exploration of human life unmatched in any previous dynasty. The famous classical novels Journey to the West, Heroes of the Marshes, and Romance of the Three Kingdoms were all written during the Ming Dynasty, as was the famous classical play, The Peony Pavilion. Crafts of all kinds went through a time of great advance during the Ming Dynasty. The long list of extraordinary achievements, including the Great Wall, the Forbidden City, and Zheng He's voyages to the Western Seas, crowned the dynasty in glory, to say nothing of the renown brought to the time by China's dreamlike silk, brocade, and porcelain, all of which charmed the entire Western world.
Yeah, what can you say? Just wow.
Wow is right.
I know. This is astounding. Yeah, we got a little bit of time.
Wow.
Any comments, any thoughts, any wows anybody want to share?
Can I tell you about tea in porcelain bowls?
Sure.
The porcelain bowls came from China that the English drank their tea in. And they were so delicate that if you just poured the hot tea in, they often broke. So that's how they started the idea of putting milk or cream in first, because that absorbed it when they put the hot tea in.
I see. That's good to know. Because they were so delicate, right?
They were so delicate and they were so prized that if you had one, you didn't want to break it, but you wanted to be able to drink your tea out of it.
I have on an introduction to Ming porcelain, but it's almost 14 minutes. We don't have time. We'll save that for next week. I've got a couple of shorter ones here, another smart history, a Ming painting. So it's probably just a couple minutes. Let's watch that.
I see this tiny figure walking through this enormous, lush, beautiful landscape, and I feel as if I am him, and I'm going to be rounding this bend and wondering where the path leads.
You can see in the very distance up on top of the next mountain peak, a little tiny roof of a pavilion creeping out from on top of the trees.
We're looking at one leaf from a series of 40 by an early Ming artist whose name is Wang Lu. He's referred to as a physician, although we don't really know much about him, but he made these magnificent ink and brush images on paper of a very famous mountain in Chinese history.
Mount Hua is in Shanxi province, and Shanxi province is a little bit to the north, and the mountain itself is known for being this treacherous vertical form, very otherworldly.
Look at the way in which he's used brush strokes to define the verticality of that mountain, those huge faces of rock that just seem to jut skyward, to create this otherworldly space that has a deeply spiritual dimension.
You can see the contour lines. First, these very rich, fluid lines demarcating the boulders. And then you've got these texture strokes that give a sense of the roughness of each peak, and then little bits of moss dripping over the sides.
And then you've also got softer washes of ink, especially in the peaks in the distance.
On top of all of it, you've got these very dense strokes, these layers upon layers of little tiny brush strokes, very fluid, rich black ink of the pine trees.
Those pine trees are amazing. They seem so alive with their boughs that seem to, almost like lightning strokes, move in every direction.
Yeah, you can imagine that this is a mountain peak that gets winter storms through it, lots of wind, and you can see how the pines have grown into these contorted shapes.
This is amazingly complex space, and all of this is done just with black ink. But there is such a spectrum of qualities of that ink that we don't feel limited in the least.
Yeah, we don't even need color. In fact, landscape originally was not thought to need color. There was so much potential of the brush, this very calligraphic use of the brush, as if you're writing.
But many of the other leaves do use color. They use a kind of subtle blue-green that has a specific reference to the history of Chinese painting.
In the Tang Dynasty, the blue-green landscape style benefited from all of these new pigments, these new minerals that were coming through the Silk Road. Here we see this reference to that use of this very subtle ink wash to refer to this paradisical realm, this otherworldly place.
This is a Taoist idea that the mountain was inhabited by the immortals, perfected beings. And so, although that's not explicitly referenced here, it does exist subtly in the background.
And as we look more deeply into each of these different leaves, all of them, of course, are done on paper. They're album leaves, meaning, unlike a hand scroll, they don't unroll, unfurl. They're specific scenes. Each of them pictures a particular place in the mountain, a particular moment in time that the artist then inscribed, explaining exactly when he visited this place and what those conditions might have been.
So these are really personal memories. These are explorations of moments that he remembers from his encounter with this landscape.
He's got moments of soul traveling, perhaps a reference to himself, this idea of journeying on one's own through the mountain. Other times maybe greeting other travelers and taking moments to rest along mountain paths.
And one of my favorite images seems to be later in his journey as he's reached the peaks of at least one of these mountains, where we see a single figure seated just at a peak, looking over a sea of mist.
You can imagine the trek that he had to take, this very winding little path behind him, and he's sitting there just taking in the vista as he's reached the summit.
The artist has created the sense of real depth, of real space, even with all the ambiguity of the negative space that is somehow also those clouds.
It seems so damp and so misty. You can feel the atmosphere, but then when you look at the mountain, you see the dry brush strokes, and you get the sense of the contrast between the very soft, wet clouds and then at the same time the very hard, rough boulders. Wang Lu painted this in 1384, and we know that he spent quite a bit of time in these mountains. He didn't just go here, climb the peak, and come home. He spent time living here, taking in every corner of the landscape and getting to know people, and painted these album leaves to record, to document each of those spaces for his own personal use.
I feel so lucky that I have access to this artist's understanding of this landscape from 700 years ago.
Yep. Let's see here. The Angry Ducks of a Ming Prince.
Angry ducks.
Angry Ducks.
Cool.
We're in the Freer Gallery of Art in a storage room looking at the work of an important 17th century Chinese painter, calligrapher, and poet.
Bada Shanren was born prince of the Ming Dynasty. When he was 18, the dynasty fell to invaders from the north who founded the Qing Dynasty, which was the last imperial dynasty in China. It had an enormous effect on the young man who fled and eventually decided to join the Buddhist church.
And because we know that he was a part of the royal family. We know that he would have been versed in Confucian philosophy and aware of Taoist philosophy as well, but he enters into a Buddhist monastery and he spends 30 years there.
When he left the monastery, the story goes that he was found in the marketplace babbling, had ripped off his monk's robes and lit them on fire. He reemerged in the 1670s, 80s as an artist, and that's when he took the name Bada Shanren. He was quite an eccentric fellow, maybe not quite as eccentric as some of the accounts would have it. The large hanging scroll is from his most mature period. Later in life, he takes one of his names as the Lotus Garden. The lotus has particular symbolism in the Buddhist faith as something pure that arises from the muck of the lake and yet comes up pristine and beautiful and flowers. And that is a metaphor for many different aspects of life, including religious awakening. And probably of all the flowers that Bada paints, the lotus is one that he comes back to again and again.
Although they're constructed just of 2 strokes of ink, they create this full volume and a sense of lightness and preciousness that recalls the beauty of a lotus blossom with remarkable fidelity.
He's very calligraphic in his approach and in his use of ink and his use of the brush. He specializes for a bit in birds and fish. You often see them where the pupil is rolled up in the socket to show the whites of the eyes, and that is the case in the large hanging scroll, where you have one duck up on high, one duck below. You wonder, is the one below looking to the one above? But this comes from the idea that in early depictions, to show the white of the eyes was to express anger. So that anger is interpreted as being his anger at the loss of the Ming Dynasty, the loss of the dynasty into which he was born. Now, that interpretation becomes popular in the early 20th century with the transition from the Qing Dynasty to the Republic. But if you look at the division, low and high, the separation between the two with a wide swath of unpainted paper, all of the flower stems coming up and rising the full length of the painting on the right side. It's interesting to note that there are at the bottom 4 stalks that begin, but they suddenly become 5 as they go up. Now, lotus stalks do not branch. So is he saying something there? That's another question to which we don't have an answer. But we can see again with the leaves at the top and the way that he does the blossoms themselves calligraphically, usually with just a couple of strokes for each petal, and the wash used to depict the leaves, the different tonalities of ink, and the layering of the ink, creating a sense of volume and three-dimensionality.
What strikes me when I look at this large scroll is the ability of the artist with such an economy of line to produce an entire environment. Each of the ducks are on a rock, and the smaller of the rocks looks so much like the kind of scholar's rock that would have been placed into a contemplative garden. And so there is this philosophical aspect here as well.
Well, indeed, are we in a garden or are we in nature? A Chinese garden is an artificial recreation of nature, created for the same reason that Chinese paint landscapes. One of the great early Chinese landscape painters, Guoxi, made the point that when you serve in government, when you have to live in the city, you become caught up in competition, issues of money and status. The proper place for mankind is with nature. That's how you understand the great Tao, the great system that brings us all together, the universal principles. So how do we avoid that? How do we get back to the Tao? Well, we paint, and we look at paintings of landscape. And the trick about a Chinese painting, whether it is landscape or a piece such as this, is that you are not observing it, you are in it. It's not you looking at the man walking on the little road. You can see the waterfall that he must hear, but can't yet see. So you imagine yourself being that individual, and you're about to turn the corner and see what you're hearing, but now there is that waterfall. You are not the person looking at that person. You are the person.
And the scale of this particular painting is such that it actually envelops me as a viewer, and I feel as if I have entered into this scene.
The perforated rock at the bottom is most often associated with the gardens of the literati, and they're bringing in these perforated rocks from Lake Tai. But they represent a microcosm of the larger cosmic mountain. And so here you have the miniature cosmic mountain, and there you have the full development of the large cliff face opposite, separated by the blank space, because in Zen, things emanate from the center out. The center for all Zen is empty. Things come from nothing. When you look at all of the album leaves, you see that again. The center is empty, and all of the details, all of the physical elements are at the edges, in the corners.
And in some of these paintings from the album, the form that I expect to see is largely outside even of the picture plane.
there's always some part that's left out, that's at the edge, that's beyond what you can see. And you as the viewer, you supply the rest. You supply that larger context.
And that may be one of the reasons that these paintings, which are more than 300 years old, feel absolutely relevant right now.
Bada Shanren is without doubt one of the most popular traditional painters in China today. He lived in a time of transition. He went from prince to a commoner living in a hut in a period of madness. In February 1912, the imperial system in China came to an end, and the Republican form of government came into existence. And in the inscription on the large hanging scroll by Wu Changshuo, one of the major 19th and early 20th century artists and calligraphers, he expresses that idea, that we are now living in times similar to those of Bada Shanren. And so we can understand his emotional meaning behind these angry birds. But modern China also comes after 1949. And that was a major transition that led to a lot of dislocation for many Chinese and a lot of social upheaval and change within China, which has led to the modern state. So there's a resonance. People feel that they're looking at someone who understands them and who expresses them.
That was good. Just understanding the philosophical basis of Chinese landscapes and how they do it, and its relationship to Tao or Zen. And I think many artists today, I know that when I paint, it's like thinking that this, leaving something unsaid or suggesting or putting details in the corner that is coming out of a space from off the canvas into the corner, and then has a it gives a sense that the painting continues outside the frame of the painting. And there's something, I don't know, just something pleasing about that to me. That so it's not off. It's just it's in Japanese artistic philosophy too, that what's left unsaid is as important as what's said. Yeah, or maybe more important. So the empty space, the use of putting objects in corners that are only like half of the object, but the other half is off out of the canvas, so that there's a sense of continuation, but also, like they said, the viewer fills it in himself or herself. And also, I like the idea of entering, that it's not you're not a detached observer looking at the landscape or the person in the landscape. You're invited. You're in the landscape. It's an immersion experience. So I think that's all important elements of Chinese and Asian painting. How are we doing for time? 3:40. I got one more short one. Let's see. Master of the fishing nets. Now let's watch this, and then I'll be in. Another smart history. Oh, come on, Joe. Eight minutes. Yeah, we can do it.
We've walked through a warren of back alleys to find the entranceway to what was once a private garden in the city of Suzhou, known as the Master of the Fishing Nets.
The name was inspired by this idyllic life of a fisherman. That name came later, came in the 18th century, but the site itself dates to the 12th century.
Back to the Southern Song Dynasty. But this is a garden that has been continuously reworked over the years. Now, we should say that a contemplative Chinese garden is not what we think of in the West when we think of the formal gardens of Versailles, for example, or the lush overgrown gardens of the manor houses in England. This is completely man-made.
And this was a place where people lived. It's an estate.
The modern city of Suzhou has more than 50 surviving gardens, in part because this area has always been an important place of commerce and great wealth, but also because it is steeped historically in highly intellectual culture.
Suzhou is known as the ancient region of Wu. This idea of Suzhou as a Grand Canal city was also very important. It was a place that was in between networks of trade, and the city profited over the years and still even today is one of the prominent economic cities in China.
The Grand Canal links north and south and was one of the great engineering feats of ancient China.
And through the Ming Dynasty, it was still a bustling center for trade, very cosmopolitan city.
So the idea of a garden within a metropolis is a place of respite. It's a place of contemplation. It's a place into which one can retreat.
To call it a garden, it's hard to see that in the first few steps. You see built spaces, walls and buildings, glimpses of courtyards along either side.
It's important to understand that the garden is in fact fully constructed. There is nothing natural here. Everything is planned, everything is purposeful. As we enter into the garden, we move through a series of halls, that is, small buildings punctuated by even smaller courtyards, creating a rhythm of enclosed, open, enclosed spaces.
We progress through these different structures. There are reception halls. We get glimpses of the natural world as it's drawn in through windows and doors.
We've just walked northward through a series of buildings and a series of courtyards, and we've entered into our first really open space. It's this beautiful interior court that is paved with a begonia pattern. And then there are small islands in the corner of rocks, of plantings. And when you look at the bamboo, for example, having looked at so many Chinese ink paintings, when I look at these leaves, I almost see the individual strokes of the paintbrush.
They draw you back to the rocks, these vertical stone slabs. These are bamboo rocks. They look like stalks of bamboo, following your eye down to a cluster of long leaves of grass that seem to echo that verticality.
And then we have these wonderful grottos, these rocks that are perforated, pierced with all these wonderful nooks that are incredibly complicated. They've been carved naturally by the water in Lake Tai, but have been enhanced by the hand of the men who constructed this garden.
We have texts on constructing gardens that date to the 17th century. This idea of crafting a garden, how many groupings, how many rocks, which way they should lay, all of this was laid out very carefully.
So this idea that a garden is a natural place is not quite right. This is a distillation of the qualities of nature that have been made more potent, very much the way that a painting will pick and choose elements of nature to create a specific kind of composition. And in fact, when we look at some of the plantings against this beautiful dirty white wall with its cracks, we get a sense of the two-dimensionality of Chinese landscape painting.
It's really a presentation of contrasts. It allows you to see these variations.
There are so many contemplative aspects here because you see the changes of the seasons in the foliage, but then you also have a sense of the eternity suggested by the great age of the rocks that are here. This is rock that has been sculpted by water over eons, that things change but at different scales of time.
These very old rocks and these very young, tender branches of bamboo, then the garden will look entirely different from week to week and month to month of every year.
We've moved into the northern part of the garden, which is associated with intellectual pursuits, and in fact, we're in the Five Peaks Library.
So first we've gone from this area that's very public to now the very private area, the very contemplative realm of the garden. We see windows that open to big views of stone gardens, rockery, and walls that are ornamented with trees, with foliage, with windows, glimpses through to the other buildings.
It's true, this hall, the Five Peaks Library, is surrounded on its two long sides by rockeries with immense stone. And the stones here feel powerful, it feels concentrated, it feels a little more intense. This would be a great place to study, to read, and to write. We've just rounded a bend and looked through a wooden doorway, through a moon gate, into this wonderful pond in the center of the garden.
This is really about an acre. This entire garden is quite small, but it's so artfully presented. We go from just looking at the ground that we're walking on, these rocks that are laid in patterns of triangles and hexagons.
Nice. And we're getting somebody hearing
Okay. Tide you over.
Needs lemon. Okay, while we end here, I'll pick up on this next time. Okay. So we'll end our session here. There's just 3 minutes left, but we're getting pretty late. So, all right, that was good. I thought we got.
It looks like.
Tried to give a whole pretty much of a shotgun approach, looking at examples.
I have to get at the upstairs.
masterpiece.
nice, Joe.
Yeah.
Very
Yes,
good.
We'll continue that next time.
Very
and,
good.
Musician.
wasn't tough, I can say. Yeah, all
As
right.
always, we enjoyed it.
Great, me too. I enjoyed it too, even though I watched them already, but I have to see them again and get more out of it. So, all right, have it. And Thursday at 4 is the story of China.
Right. We'll be there.
Great.
Okay, great.
Yep.
All right. So,
Thank you.
great.